Okay, I believe we are now live both on Zoom and on the Center for Justice and International Law's Facebook page. So we can begin today's event. Good afternoon to everyone, or good morning or night, depending on where you're following us from. Welcome to this great panel discussion titled Achieving and Sustaining Gender Parity in the UN Special Procedures. This event, which takes place as a side event to the Human Rights Council 50th session, was organized by the GQUAL campaign, the Center for Justice and International Law, CEHIL, the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, IRCT, and the World Organization Against Torture, OMCT. I am Maria Noel Leoni, and I will have the pleasure of introducing today's panelists and moderating the event. I'm a member of the GQUAL campaign, an initiative that since 2015 has been working to achieve gender parity in international justice. And while Viviana will tell us much more about the campaign later on, I would like to introduce today's topic by saying that GQUAL's data shows that women are underrepresented in the international bodies that impart justice and develop international law. This means that women are frequently absent or underrepresented in the adoption of important decisions that shape the world, the societies, and the communities we live in. Decisions that impact our laws, policies, institutions, and our human rights. Both because women have a right to be equally represented in those decision-making spaces, and because equality and representation are key to strong, legitimate, and impactful institutions, we need to find solutions to the underrepresentation of women. Today, we will be discussing this issue with respect to one of the key UN mechanisms for human rights protection, the special procedures of the Human Rights Council. These mechanisms, composed by special rapporteurs, independent experts, and working groups, are integrated by human rights experts from all over the world, who are in charge of monitoring, reporting, and recommending measures to protect human rights in key contexts, situations, or countries. While gender parity has yet to be achieved, it is with respect to the special procedures where GQUAL has seen some of the most encouraging progress in the past years. Women are now occupying several mandates that have never been led by women before, and interesting measures and decisions have been adopted to achieve this goal. We have an incredible panel comprised by key actors who in their diverse capacities have been part and have contributed to this progress. Our goal is to celebrate the progress, but also to identify how to keep on moving forward, not only to achieve gender parity in the special procedures, but also to sustain it and to share the experience with other key international spaces where women remain severely underrepresented. Before introducing our first panelist, I would like to go over some brief logistics. There is live English and Spanish interpretation. You can all access it by clicking on the globe icon in your screen below. If you have questions for the panelists, you can either type them in the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar or via chat on the CEHIL on the Facebook streaming. And depending on time, we will make our best to answer some of those at the end. The format that we will follow is that each panelist will have 7-8 minutes for an initial presentation, followed by 2 additional minutes to react to what was shared by the group. And with that, I will move on to introduce our first panelist, Ambassador Federico Villegas, who is the permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations office at Geneva, and currently the president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Welcome, Ambassador, and thanks for joining. In both capacities, but mainly as president to the Human Rights Council, you have a key role in the appointment of mandate holders. Can you share with us how is gender balance relevant in the selection process, and what steps have you and the Human Rights Council taken or think that have yet to be taken to achieve and sustain gender parity?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes, okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and congratulations for convening this event, because the goal of this event should not be a goal of NGOs or should not be a goal of mandate holders. It's a collective responsibility of the international community to achieve the goal of this panel, of this event today, achieving and sustaining gender parity in the UN special procedures. So why? Obviously, we are a multilateral body, but we have different roles and different mechanisms. And we have the Universal Periodic Review addressing human rights situation in every single country of the world, which is unprecedented before the Council was created, as you know. That's one role. Another role is addressing serious human rights situations, either by themes or by country, when the urgency and the seriousness requires immediate attention. And the third is the progressive development of human rights standards and norms. Those three hats that we have are key to know that they're all important and they have to be stressed and strengthened. But we have different mechanisms for that. So we have the discussions as an intergovernmental body with all the problems and advantages of that, because at the end, we all know that human rights can only be protected and promoted, and actually the life can be changed in the field by the states. So the intergovernmental body and the discussions in the council, with all the criticism that we may have, is there and is the way that countries, states discuss to move forward the machinery. And then we have the eyes and the ears of the council, which are the special procedures. And we have a big ear and a big eye here with Victor that has just finished his role as president of the special procedure. So why do we think that we need to achieve the goal of this event of today? It's pretty obvious that even though we might have different mechanisms and different roles, there is a constituency that we deal with. And you know, international human rights law, we always have to remember, it's only 77 years old. In historical terms, that is absolutely nothing. That's one little grain in a beach. So this 77 years old, we created a revolutionary idea that every single person has a right beyond being a national of a state or another, and the whole international community collectively has to protect that right. That, from the international law point of view, is absolutely revolutionary. And we are actually trying to achieve and sustain that revolutionary idea. So if that is our constituency, our goal, our essence, our raison d'etre since we were born as a new branch of international law, and half of humanity are women. So not only half of humanity are women, but at the same time, we have different genders. We have different a diversity of genders, and we have special procedures that have adapted to the different times in history. So of course, when we created the first one from Argentina, as you know, the working group on enforced disappearance of persons, probably gender parity was not in the question at that time. The importance was to put the international community with the issue of enforced disappearance. And now we have around 50. So as president of the council, what I try to do, and with this I wrap up, is to stress first, to the first day I took office on January 1st, I asked the graphic on regional and gender representation in the special procedures. And as your concept note says, if you look at the bigger picture, we are better than we were before in matters of gender parity at large. But we still have specific special procedures. And there's one important thing that you say in the note. When you leave out special procedures related to women's issues, you go down in the percentage of gender parity. So that is probably a half full glass, maybe. And on the regional way, I also realized that we have quite a regional good average of representation, not in the office of the High Commissioner, maybe, which is a pending issue, but in the matter of the special procedures, it is like that. But within each mandate, that's not the case. So we have 5 special procedures mandate held only by men since their creation. The special rapporteur on torture was held by 6 men since its creation. The special rapporteur on freedom of peaceful assembly and association, 3 men. The one on environment, 2 men. Promotion of truth, justice, reparation, 2 men. And SOGI, 2 men. So I think that we need to improve the view to look at gender parity with a more diverse, open-minded way, because each mandate is a world of human rights challenges that cannot be actually put in a box, in a matrix, as if we were counting numbers, because numbers at the end are the same. They're numbers, but you can have 60 special procedures, but they are not numbers. Each of them are absolutely different. And that is why I took the decision to change the recommendation of the consultative group, that they decided to propose 3 excellent candidates, of course, for the special rapporteur on torture. But not only I looked at the merit of the candidates, but also at the bigger picture of this constituency, because in my years with human rights, a long time, and even though she looks so young, Vivi, always, we just known each other for 25 years. In this world, we always saw that the torture issue, the prevention of torture, has to have always, it will always benefit the prevention of torture to have a woman's view and expertise. So many reports of the subcommittee and so many reports of CAT and rapporteurs have talked about women, the situation of women in detention, in penitentiaries, the problems. There are so many things. So it was obvious, at least for me, and it was not an easy decision because I had a lot of pressure, just because they stressed that she was number 2 and not number 1. That's basically what. But you know, there's nothing that prevents a president to choose one of the 3. Actually, it happened several times in the past. So I chose an excellent woman candidate to propose to the council, but it will be appointed on July 8th at the end of the day, hopefully. And you know, at the end, what you did, and with this I conclude, you know, when NGOs push us to do something as states, I always say there wouldn't be a Human Rights Council if we weren't for NGOs. That's a fact. And sometimes with dialogues like this, we understand each other's points of view to see how far states can accept suggestions by NGOs, whether it's a resolution, an appointment. But in this case, the proof that what many NGOs and many countries also try to encourage the council to appoint the first woman rapporteur, the proof that you were right is that after I made my decision, I think I didn't get absolutely not a single criticism by anybody. And even some state that you know was not happy perhaps tried to convince me before, but right after the appointment, it was so obvious that it was a good appointment that the international community deserved, that I had no call of that state, that government. So I think I want to conclude congratulating you for being such an important, you know, consciousness of the way that we had to move our machinery. And we might disagree sometimes, but we need that consciousness that events and people like you bring to the council. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ambassador Villegas. We are grateful for your leadership in highlighting and addressing this issue, and also very much in agreeing that this is a collective responsibility of the international community, and looking forward to engage more on that. So I'll move on to our second panelist, who is Milena Costas. She's a human rights expert from Spain, and a member of the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, and was one of the key members who drafted the committee's report on gender violence in international bodies that was presented to the Human Rights Council by the request of the Human Rights Council last year, with very specific recommendations. Many thanks, Milena, for joining us in the panel. Please, if you can, do share with us, why did the committee prepare this report, and what did you find and recommend in order to increase gender violence in the UN bodies and in the special procedures in particular? Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, María, embajador, distinguidos panelistas.
Thank you, Maria, Ambassador, and the audience. I'm going to take the opportunity to speak in my own language because I'm rather faster at expressing myself, and I'll be able to compact all the content that I've prepared. Thank you all for the invitation to participate in this distinguished panel, which, as the ambassador has said, ideologically, we are before a topic which, despite the achievements that we've achieved in previous years, continues to be pertinent for a simple reason, which is that despite all the progress that we've made, they shouldn't be anecdotal achievements, but we need to, let's say, to develop procedures to introduce changes that will truly transform the system and which will allow for these necessary changes to endure in time. So I think it's an essential panel, and it's an important moment to discuss it. It's an important moment because an important word to bring up is to avoid regressing. We are living through moments where we see how rights we thought were given, there is now a risk of losing them. So for this reason, between all of us, we have to look for opportunities so that these changes will be maintained in a permanent way. As you mentioned, I wanted to present on the report that the advisory committee has developed on this topic. And the title is The Current Level of Representation in Organisms and Mechanisms of Human Rights to Achieve Gender Parity. And this report was promoted by civil society, and the committee can only do these studies if it receives a mandate from the council, the Human Rights Council, and indeed we received that mandate in 2019. And so it's
a lo largo de los cuales la relatora que fue designada por nuestro comité, que es la profesora Elizabeth Salmon de la Universidad Católica del Perú, que ha sido, digamos, la que ha llevado a sus espaldas la redacción y todo el peso de este trabajo que yo con mucho cariño presento hoy, pero hay que reconocerle su mérito. Bueno, pues ha desarrollado a lo largo de todos estos 2 años, haciendo, bueno, pues recopilando, hemos lanzado un cuestionario, dando la oportunidad a los estados, a la sociedad civil, a la academia, a los procedimientos especiales de responder. Hemos celebrado distintas consultas regionales a lo largo de todos estos años en las distintas zonas geográficas para recopilar todo tipo de inputs, y por lo tanto digamos que es el informe que mencionáis en la nota 2 de la Concept Note, donde tenéis la referencia para los que nos están escuchando. Bueno, pues es el resultado de un proceso bueno, pues amplio de consultas, ¿no? Y simplemente indicar también que, bueno, pues en la segunda parte incluye un anexo muy interesante con toda una serie de tablas donde se reflejan bueno, pues todo este datos que manifiestan el desequilibrio y la desigualdad en términos de paridad que existen en todos los distintos órganos de derechos humanos en Naciones Unidas. Por lo tanto, se ha hecho un estudio tanto de los órganos de tratados como de los órganos de los procedimientos especiales y también del comité asesor. El comité asesor, un pequeño inciso, como se demuestra en el informe, al día de hoy tenemos 8 hombres y 7 mujeres, es un órgano integrado por 18 expertos. Por distintas circunstancias estamos en el proceso de nominación de 3 expertos que han tenido que dejar el comité, pero digamos que al día de hoy tenemos casi una paridad en estos números, lo cual es un dato inédito, porque hay que tener en cuenta que si nos vamos simplemente al 2018, por ejemplo, solo existían 3 mujeres dentro del comité. Entonces, por lo tanto, quiere decir que realmente estamos dando grandísimos pasos en muy poco tiempo. Bueno, simplemente comentarles cuál es el principal mensaje que manda este informe, y yo lo voy a decir de una forma un poco directa, ¿no? Porque yo creo que el mensaje fundamental es que si al día de hoy la infrarrepresentación de las mujeres en los órganos decisionales de nuestras sociedades e instituciones resulta injustificable, la falta de paridad y de representación de las mujeres en los órganos de Naciones Unidas es simple y llanamente inaceptable. Eso es para mí el mensaje en términos más diplomáticos. Está escrito lógicamente en nuestro informe, pero yo creo que es el mensaje que se quiere enviar, y efectivamente la desigualdad de representación en los órganos de toma de decisión y más en concreto en los órganos de derechos humanos atenta contra los principios que se proclaman en la propia Carta Fundacional de las Naciones Unidas, aparte de derechos, claro, lógicamente reconocidos en los tratados específicos de protección o de eliminación de la discriminación de la mujer, el principio de igualdad, de no discriminación, etcétera. Y por lo tanto, digamos creo que es una situación que, como ha dicho el embajador, todos tenemos la responsabilidad de subvertir de manera permanente. 3 datos fundamentales a los cuales ya habéis un poco hecho mención. Desde 1980 las mujeres han estado muy por debajo, hablando ya específicamente, de los procedimientos especiales, públicos especiales. Los datos revelan que desde 1980 las mujeres han estado muy por debajo del 50% en todos los mandatos. Segundo dato, en los mandatos por país, las mujeres han estado hasta este momento siempre infrarrepresentadas. Históricamente solo 10 de los 54 nombramientos han sido mujeres. En el momento de escribir el informe solo había 2 mujeres en mandatos por países de los 11 que existían. Y otro dato, como ya se ha señalado, es que pues las mujeres se prefieren para algunos mandatos, pero digamos que se excluyen de otros mandatos. Y bueno, pues se ha mencionado tortura, derecho a la privacidad, medio ambiente, desarrollo, orientación sexual. Todavía hay mandatos donde las mujeres, bueno, pues no han podido, por razones que estamos estudiando, lógicamente, y discutiremos, no han sido designadas. Y por lo tanto ahí puede hacerse 2 lecturas. Una primera, o que no ha habido candidatas, y una segunda es que hay un sesgo también en la adjudicación y en la selección de los candidatos dependiendo de los temas. Y esto se aplica, como también se conoce en distintos grupos de trabajo, también podría hablarse de, hasta cierto punto, un sesgo en la elección de hombres para ocupar esos mandatos, pero ahí también el informe explica pues que este sesgo, en cierta manera, estaría en mayor medida justificado. Bueno, ¿cuáles son las soluciones, digamos, que aporta nuestro informe? Y no sé si ya estoy aprovechando, tomando los 2 minutos adicionales que María nos había dado. Simplemente para la audiencia o la gente que no sepa cómo se nombran o se eligen o se seleccionan a los relatores especiales o grupos de trabajo, bueno, pues esto se hace a través de un grupo consultivo que está formado por 5 miembros y cada uno es representante de uno de los 5 grupos regionales que existen en Naciones Unidas. Y este grupo consultivo hace una recomendación al presidente, que tenemos aquí presente, del Consejo, que es el que en última instancia, y me corrija por favor si me equivoco, hace la propuesta final al Consejo. Entonces, bueno, pues por supuesto, de las recomendaciones que hacemos en este informe se dirigen a mejorar este procedimiento también dentro de este grupo consultivo, porque uno de los principales hallazgos, digamos, que se dieron en el informe, o que subrayaba el informe, es que el propio grupo consultivo, bueno, pues no sigue criterios de paridad en su propia composición. Por lo tanto, bueno, pues ahí, como verán, pues una de las recomendaciones es introducir pues una serie de directrices para que se garantice que efectivamente ya este propio grupo que hace esta selección de los candidatos, pues de una forma u otra, bueno, pues tenga la paridad y, bueno, siendo 5 miembros, pues se puede alternar, digamos, en cada ciclo para que por lo menos se garantice que 2 mujeres estén presentes en este grupo. Bueno, pues se introducen otras recomendaciones, por ejemplo, al propio presidente también. Bueno, pues la elección, lógicamente, a iguales méritos, que se recomiende el candidato del género menos representado, o también, por ejemplo, pues se introduce otras recomendaciones también dirigidas al presidente y al grupo consultivo sobre la justificación, ¿no? Y dar información sobre cómo en su proceso de selección o de nominación han aplicado este criterio de paridad, y también, bueno, pues con una cierta transparencia en los casos en los que hay un déficit de mujeres, justificar, digamos, bueno, pues cuáles son los criterios que le han llevado a escoger al candidato masculino. Por lo tanto, digamos que estas son algunas de las muchas recomendaciones que se incluyen dentro del informe. Simplemente un pequeño mención a buenas prácticas y otras recomendaciones que se dirigen a los estados. Lógicamente, bueno, pues se dirigen más bien en la promoción de las candidatas femeninas, en la difusión de la información, bueno, pues la explicación, bueno, pues el apoyo financiero y logístico que se debe dar también a las relatoras especiales, por supuesto, medidas o especial atención a los problemas de conciliación familiar que pueden surgir. Y, bueno, un aspecto que yo quiero subrayar, que no es muy conocido, es que todos los expertos independientes de Naciones Unidas trabajamos pro bono. Entonces también ahí hay un elemento, digamos, o un dato que perjudica especialmente a las mujeres y que puede ser bueno, pues una causa de disuasión para las mujeres para presentar su candidatura, por no hablar de las condiciones de desigualdad por motivos económicos, que lógicamente también para mí bueno, pues me resulta bastante importante subrayar ese sesgo también, no solo por motivo de género, sino también por motivos económicos. Bueno, para acabar, simplemente quería dar una nota positiva y, bueno, corregidme si me equivoco, porque es el dato que he visto hoy preparando esta intervención, y he visto que precisamente el grupo consultivo tiene sus datos actualizados y manifiesta que existe una paridad al día de hoy en los procedimientos especiales. Bueno, entonces, mi opinión, esto viene a demostrar que cuando se quiere, se puede. Sin embargo, insisto que lo importante es hacer que estos niveles se mantengan en el tiempo. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Milena. Para nosotras este informe es elemental, no solo por el análisis, sino también por estas recomendaciones, y nos sumamos desde la campaña a un reconocimiento y saludo también a la profesora Elizabeth Salmón, que conocemos de su liderazgo en el tema. So I'll continue back in English to introduce our third panelist, who is Víctor Madrigal, who is a renowned human rights expert from Costa Rica and the current and first UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Víctor, welcome and thanks for joining us. We would very much welcome your views, both as a mandate holder, but also as a former key staff of other international bodies, such as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, on why gender violence and diversity matters and how it affects the work and the impact of the international institutions.
Thank you very much, Mariana Arel, and thank you very much, of course, to all colleagues in the panel, and to the GQUAL campaign for their very kind invitation to join you. I'm an imperfect replacement for the chair of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedure, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who, as you know, is the current special rapporteur on the highest attainable level of health, physical and mental, and who is our chair at the moment. And I will be delighted to share with you some perceptions from the point of view of a mandate holder. For those of you watching, you are kind of receiving a succession of views, beginning, of course, with Ambassador Villegas, the chair of the Human Rights Council, the head of the body that takes decisions in relation to the confirmation of these bodies and these special procedures, and then Milena Costas, who was describing the way that this excellent study was carried out. And I join my voice of thanks to for this excellent study that I read with great interest. And it encapsulates in such a clear way the reasons of substance and of procedures and of outlook, why this actually matters, and it matters a great deal. And I also would like to say that Ambassador Villegas was giving some examples as to the decisions that he is called to take in relation to this. And I would like to salute those decisions, because I actually think that they have been visionary in the way to acknowledge how this is a factor. Now, from my perspective, and having been the chair of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures during the last year and a member for 3 years now, there's a number of issues that become very apparent from the way in which we work. And I'd like to bring that perspective into the fold that moves from the procedural and the principled into the pragmatic and the outcomes that are created by special procedures. So the report that we are talking about, issued, of course, by this advisory committee, makes a number of descriptions that are, we could say, the foundational platform on why this is substantially important in relation to the coherence of the work of the United Nations. And I think the choice of understanding the impact on equality and non-discrimination, the effectiveness of the work of bodies and mechanisms, and the range of perspectives give us the point of departure for what I think is a fundamental way to understand the value of diversity, and in particular gender parity in the work of special procedures. And that is the reception over, I would say, the last 6 years of feminist thinking as one of the key areas for development in the work of special procedures. And of course, I'm referring to intersectional approaches, for example, and gender-based frameworks in the work of special procedures. I am one of the very lucky mandate holders that has in the resolution creating my mandate, I'm actually requested to work on the basis of intersectionality and intersectional approaches. And I think that this is the legacy of the visionary work of feminists that have been enriching the work of special procedures and bringing intersectional approaches to the very theories that understand how violence and discrimination, extreme forms of human rights violations and concerns need to be provided with the nuance of this type of frameworks, along with gender-based frameworks. And this is what I'd like to bring as my first point. I recognize, and as a long member of the GQUAL campaign and enthusiast supporter of your work, I hope that you know that this is sincere. I recognize the value of gender parity in and of itself because of the reasons outlined by the advisory committee. But in practice, I also think it works as a transformative force for shedding light into the multiple and intersecting ways in which experiences of discrimination happen and happen to people around the world. As a feminist from sub-Saharan Africa said on my second day on the job, she said, we don't just have one way to identify ourselves. Experiences of violence and discrimination are the result of multiple intersecting dimensions. And of course, gender parity is the key to unfold the multiplicity and the nuanced understanding of how discrimination actually happens and is perpetrated upon people all around the world. And one of the things that I think at some point somebody doing a PhD study, it will not be me, is going to actually be tracking down how this legacy, this conceptual legacy has unfolded on special procedures. I've had the privilege of working with a number of this thinking throughout the years, and I have the specific examples on the energy that generated our input on the draft Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, for example, our recent input to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. All of these instruments gather the way in which feminist thinking has actually propelled the way in which special procedures understand analysis of violence and discrimination into a completely different era, something that I think, Maria Noel, since you were so kindly mentioning my work with the Commission and the Court, I think is the type of influence that feminist thinking had also in the composition of the Court, I would say in the last 20 years. So clearly, when you put together the evidence of how these contributions have reshaped the way in which these bodies interpret human rights law, with the theory that already was signaled in this report by the advisory committee in relation to the impact on range of issues and perspectives considered by United Nations bodies and the effectiveness of the work, you have there all of the scientific evidence that you need to, I think, prove the reasons why, if this were not completely self-evident because of reasons of non-discrimination, it becomes the proof of these elements being identified already by the advisory committee in this rich report. I'd like to also mention that I think an element that we're more and more seeing, and that I think it's quite welcome, is this idea that parity is not static in relation to time. We also need to see it in a composite analysis of the way mandates have been held throughout time. And I think the example that was given of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Torture is a particularly telling example of which, without undermining the excellence and the dedication of previous mandate holders, there was clearly an asymmetry that manifested itself through time, in which perhaps is difficult to judge in mandates that are unipersonal. I actually was quite provoked when it was mentioned that the special rapporteur, the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity, out of 2 mandate holders, it has been 2 men, and I just realized that that was the case. So interested to see how that is going to unfold in the future. So time brings an analysis in relation to that, and as I think Milena was making reference, it is true that at the moment we have complete parity in relation to special procedures, but it is also true that if you analyze that disaggregating in different type of mandates, or you analyze it in relation to time, the picture that unfolds presents a very different nuance. As does, and this is what my third point is going to be, as does the granularity when you analyze the ways in which mandate holders have a profile that responds, I believe, to the particular circumstances that are made necessary because of the conditions under which we exercise our work. And this is a point that I wanted to mention, because I think that this is one of the great outcomes of gender parity, is that you begin to see granularity in other dimensions. I am very concerned about the way in which the disproportionate burdens in which life is structured all around the globe actually imposes duties and burdens on women in a way that I'm not really sure we can continue to rely on that gender parity that we have at the moment on special procedures. I'll share with you that when COVID-19 hit, one of the most difficult areas for us to deal with was the enormous burden that was being faced, in particular by our colleagues, female special rapporteurs and independent experts and members of working groups. We carried out a diagnostic at the time after 6 months of COVID, and it blew across the board that our colleagues were facing disproportionate burden as caregivers of their children. They were facing disproportionate burdens as caregivers for elder family members, and they were the ones most impacted by disparities in access to financial stability. And this actually represented a significant finding of the internal survey that we carried out and in which we worked with the Office of the High Commissioner to try and bring some balance into some of those aspects. And I think that this actually reflected that even though we have achieved this milestone, as Milena was saying, we need to ensure that regression is not present. And I am very concerned that under current circumstances of continued COVID-19 impact all around the world, it's something that we may not be able to rely on, including when it comes to women presenting themselves as candidates for these positions, given that financial precariousness has become a real part of the picture for many of them. And for us, it was, I won't say that it was surprising, but it was actually surprising to what extent our colleagues or our women colleagues in special procedures were bearing the brunt of the impact of COVID. I'll finish here just by quickly mentioning that one of the things that I have found, and I know many of my colleagues have found extremely useful in relation to these issues, is the type of mechanisms that in a very concrete way, campaigns such as GQUAL have given us to actually remind ourselves and others about the importance of these issues. So for example, I remember that a few years ago, I signed a plea not to participate in any panels that would not, that would only be composed of men, the infamously called manels, which actually have made me refuse at least 5 events a year in the last few years, hopefully creating some awareness. And also many of my colleagues and I have in our terms of reference for participation in events that gender representation and the ideal of gender parity needs to be present in the events that we participate in. So hopefully this type of very pragmatic approaches, which I also know were part of the recommendations of the advisory committee, are things in which we can continue to rely so that we can actually take them forward. As always, thank you and congratulations for your excellent work, and very much looking forward to the continued discussion.
Many thanks, Victor. You bring many important analyses and issues that are key to understanding how gender violence affects and impacts the work of the special procedures mandate, and with that, their capacity of responding to the diverse and intersectional realities of the human rights violations they oversee. With that note, I'll move on to our 4th panelist, Viviana Christicevic, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Justice and International Law, and also one of the founders and member of the GQUAL campaign Secretariat. GQUAL has been one of the main voices calling for gender parity in international justice, including in the special procedures. So Viviana, if you can share with us more about how does the campaign see the progress achieved and how the challenges and the opportunities that remain ahead. Thank you, Viviana.
Thank you, Maria Noel. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be here in this panel. I'm here in Geneva, so good evening to everybody here and good day to anybody joining remotely. This is a very timely topic, and I'm delighted to be surrounded by this knowledgeable, thoughtful, and provoking group of people that are committed to change. When we started the campaign, the GQUAL campaign 7 years ago, we were convinced not only on how important and consequential achieving parity would be, but that it was feasible, that we could do it. As Milena Costas said, it was achievable in a short period of time, and that it could have deep rippling effects for equality and access to international justice. So since the beginning of our work, we strongly believed that the right to equality sustained the need for gender parity in international justice. And we said it in our foundational document, the GQUAL Declaration, that was signed by over 1,000 men and women around the world. But we also recognize the importance of challenging the underrepresentation of women in international bodies based on considerations of legitimacy, representation, and the impact of gender equality on peace and development, as it was affirmed in this landmark report on the topic issued by the Advisory Committee of the Human Rights Council last year, that was mentioned extensively by Milena Costas. And we still stand by these words and beliefs, and we note that we made progress. Significant progress has been achieved in these 6 years, but a lot more needs to happen in order to push for gender parity and to account for intersectional discrimination that permeates also the composition of bodies in international justice. So let's go to the reasons for hope. And as it was reviewed by Federico Villegas, the president of the Human Rights Council, and Milena, almost 50% of the positions in the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, these eyes and ears of the intergovernmental organization, are occupied by women now. So this is a stark difference from when we started the campaign, when we launched it. And one of the key areas where we measured the exclusion of women was the 19 mandates that at the time had never been held by a woman. Today, 11 mandates remain without ever having been led by a woman, and we are about to make history again, since 2 female candidates were recently proposed by Ambassador Villegas for the positions of Special Rapporteur on Torture and Special Rapporteur on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and they will be designated by the Human Rights Council next week. So this is truly an important moment, because it means that we've really shattered some of the glass ceiling, but the glass ceiling is not still broken. And we can see that when we look in a more granular view at where the women are in the special procedures, and we see that women are still in spaces of representation. So they are in the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, and in obviously the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking of Persons, for example. So mandates that are linked to representation or to issues that affect primarily women, but not only, are the spaces where women are situated. And if we look more broadly at international justice, the situation in international tribunals is pretty appalling still. We are bordering the 30% threshold, and you can look at the numbers at the website of the GQUAL campaign. And also the change has been minimal in the treaty bodies, where only half of the 10 treaty bodies have achieved gender parity. Yet we can celebrate, and we have to celebrate what happened in the special procedures realm. And we not only need to celebrate it, but try to understand it, crystallize it, and use it as a precedent in order to see what we can replicate for the other spaces in international justice and international bodies. So in trying to understand what went right, we have been discussing amongst ourselves, and I would be really very interested in hearing from all of you, what were some of the critical factors, and we identified a few. One was that there was a stronger commitment at the institutional level by the Secretary General of the UN and at the higher levels of power at the Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to promote a broader discussion about gender balance in the UN. And this, coupled with the foresight of many governments and ambassadors and the personal commitment of men and women in positions of influence that were actually critical for creating an environment where change was possible and where the institutions were actually backing very practical measures in order to move forward. Still, change could not have happened and would not have happened if there was not a community of practice, academics, civil society, including the GQUAL campaign and many NGOs and networks that have been constantly monitoring at every step the path for parity and representation, advocating and proposing changes in the procedures, mentoring and making women aware of the positions that were out there, and helping to change the institutional cultures and the legal frameworks that surround the election of candidates. And finally, one third factor that we think is interesting and important is that progress could not have happened without the mobilization of many women who put their names forward and said that they would aspire to the mandates, eroding the long-lasting myth that there are no women that are interested in these positions or that have the type of career path or competencies that would allow them to aspire to this position. So all of this to say that when there's political will and a constituency that demands some level of accountability, change is possible. And the increased transparency on the selection procedures and more information on the gender composition of the mandate and the vacancies have also made those gains possible. So there's still a lot to be done to ensure gender parity. And we think that there's a very important task that we have ahead in looking at how to crystallize the gains in special procedures, because as members of the campaign, we've looked at the data in different tribunals and treaty bodies, and we've seen a pendulum, going back and forth in the composition of many organs. And you can see that with the ICC, you can see it with the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, you can see it with many others where making progress towards parity doesn't necessarily crystallize parity. So what Milena Costas was saying in terms of ensuring the guidelines that are necessary so that the consultative group to the Human Rights Council that foresees and encourages this consultative group to look at parity in order to determine what names are going to be put forward is critical. And so are many other very, very specific and poignant measures that the report that the advisory committee made has made. And those include producing, in some cases, only women's shortlists, extending deadlines, prioritizing women for mandates with historic underrepresentation, as it happened with the mandate on torture and others. And there are also suggestions and recommendations that are linked to the need to disseminate information and track and keep the numbers ready so that decision makers can actually move forward in the shared commitment to parity, as well as a set of recommendations that are directed to the Human Rights Committee President and the coordination of regional groups to actively consider gender balance in their decisions and consultations on possible candidates. And many of the issues that we can learn from the process and the achievements at the special procedures and the significant gains that were made in this realm can be extrapolated to national processes of nomination and international processes of selection of members for those spaces of international justice and the treaty bodies where there's still significant underrepresentation. So taking into account the information that has been tracked by the campaign and by the advisory committee in terms of underrepresentation in different bodies and in specific countries is critical. Promoting participatory processes at the national level that are not only transparent, but that are committed to promoting gender parity is critical. Changing some of the ways in which voting and selection processes occur is also key, and is one of those stumbling blocks for achieving parity that needs a lot of critical thinking by our community. So we could talk about this for days, but given the limits of time and the desire to listen to all of you and your reactions, I would just say that what has happened at the level of special procedures and in this last few years shows that change is possible, that there are some lessons that should be learned from this process, and that we need a collective engagement and commitment to keep on sustaining this gains for parity and for equality. And we have to accelerate some of the changes that we're committed to achieve through following some of the recommendations that the advisory committee put forward in terms of the roadmap for equality in international justice, but also think for our community, what are other steps that need to be taken so that not only women access those spaces, but are also sustained in material equality, such as the suggestion that Professor Costas and Victor Madrigal made in terms of ensuring that members of these organs and rapporteurs receive some type of compensation for their dedication to the mandates. So thank you.
Thank you, Vivi. And with that, we'll move on to our last panelist, Lisa Henry, who is the Secretary General at the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, IRCT. IRCT has a strong experience of engaging with the special procedures, particularly with the Special Rapporteurship Against Torture, which, as we heard, will now be led by a woman for the first time in history. We would be grateful, Lisa, for your comments on that process and on why you think women's involvement and leadership in a mandate like the SRT is so important as an example to what we need to take into account for other mandates that have not been held by women before.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Ambassador Villegas, I would say half of humanity are women and half of torture survivors are women. Documentation in our organization shows that 51% of the 60,801 survivors treated by the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, 160 members in 75 states, countries of the world, sorry, are women. So there was absolutely no doubt in our minds when this mandate came open that this had to be a woman. The reality of what's going on for women out there cannot be ignored. I don't think it is by men in this position, but the understanding of that lived experience and bringing that forcefully to the table and consistently to the table was something that we, and I can tell this from an NGO perspective, we decided as global organizations in the anti-torture campaigns, OMCT, IRCT, APT, FIACAT was with us. We had some meetings behind the scene, as NGOs often will do, and said, we're going to move on this. Female candidates, where are they? Let's go. And this is the way I think civil society can really mobilize, because the cause was so obvious. And what you talked about, and I think it was Milena, you know, candidates, are there candidates enough? There are tons of candidates. There are well-qualified women out there. And this time, of the 30 applicants, 21 were women, many of them incredibly highly qualified. So this idea of, and that's what I would like to speak to, what these NGOs have been doing is coaching, mentoring, explaining, talking about what does it mean to have this mandate? What will it cost? What is the time you're going to have to spend? What kind of language will you have to be using? What kind of corridors will you be navigating in this position? It's a big role for us. We spend a lot of time on it. Luckily, in the organizations that we work on, this whole debate and discussion, which is really kind of an educational pathway for young leaders to have their eyes open to this topic, it allows us then to bring young leaders within our organizations to the forefront. So there's like a whole forest of female leadership within organizations, among others, like the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, who are ready and willing to step into this mandate. Yes, they need training. Yes, they need to understand the intricacies of it, but they're there. And that's what happened this time. There were quite a few members that said, I'd be willing to do that. And we're talking to them about, you'll have to leave your family this many days of the year. You'll have to be traveling to areas where it's quite risky this much time. It will cost you in hours, in emotions, in your professional skills, in your checkbook at the end of the day to do this. Are you willing? Yes, we're willing. So it was a really fascinating process to be on with colleagues in the NGO environment to say, let's get the qualified candidates into the process so they could do the interviews, so they can submit all the application. You know, there's a lot behind this, right? The whole process behind the administrative process of getting to that point where you actually submit your application. But that's what some of the NGOs have been helpful in doing, this coaching, mentoring, bringing forward young leadership into that process. I would say, given that there's so many female candidates out there and we saw them stepping up this time, I would be very willing to talk with other mandates about how to do this, but you do need to have civil society, among others, who are willing to take on the role. And it's an informal role. I mean, this is part of what we do. This is not part of the IRCT strategy as such, but it's just implicit, right? People should have a voice where the decisions about them are being taken. And so this whole piece about transparency and accountability and having more females in our own leadership is also a role we've taken on. And as Victor, you were talking about, you know, we say we want a gender balanced board. We do have that. We want a gender balanced council. We have that. We want a gender balanced management team. We have that. We don't participate in panels where there's not gender parity. So there's small things and large things that we can all be doing as civil society in making sure that as we work toward getting more gender parity also in the special rapporteurs, and we're so pleased and proud to see the first female as special reporter for torture, hopefully on July 8th. And also a person that we know very well in RCT. And there's also been, I wouldn't say grooming, but there's been a lot of work done. So she knows this work so well, as many of the other members who applied for this position. Last thing I'd like to say here is, it's also important as we talk about gender parity. Now I'm repeating myself a bit, but the younger generation, right? Young women have to see, who work in civil society or in ministries around the world, that this is possible for them. And the way to do that is to talk more about these mandates and the possibility, but also to walk the talk, right? We all have a responsibility. And Dr. Uju from Nigeria was one of the actually applicants for the job, always talks about this, and I will repeat her fine words. We should all use our spheres of influence. Each and every one of us, you know, at home, in our community, in our neighborhood, in our professional spheres, but also our private spheres, we have the ability to influence. And if we can fight the good fight, which this one is, I think we can make, and we showed it here. I mean, we were working the phones like crazy, right? We were using every single possibility of any kind of influence and sphere of influence we had with this mandate in action. That's what it takes. If it's a good fight, you fight it. So, I mean, okay, I'm gotten very enthusiastic here, but it was really nice to be part of this process. Thank you very much for inviting us in. And as I said, there are a lot of lessons to be learned. You can't map it out every time, right? It won't go the same every single time. You know, our donors are always asking us, where's your results-based framework? And how did you get from A to B to C? And, you know, it's not a linear pathway, right? But if the window opens or the door, push it, bang it open and go in there and take the space. And I think that's what we've done this time. So Ambassador Villegas, thank you very much for taking the bold decision, and all of you on the call and all of us. We did this together, right? This is SDG 17 partnership in action. So thank you very much.
Many thanks, Lisa, for that. And it was also very important for the GQUAL campaign to be involved in that campaign. And we felt part very much of what you were saying about using our spheres of influence to fight the good fight. So we don't have a lot of time, but I think it was a great exchange of ideas. But we do have some minutes, and I would like to pose a question to you all and give you a minute to provide like sort of a final remarks that set the tone to what comes next. So you all said that we are now at a critical moment where aside from the granular understanding of the numbers that we very much need to take into account, gender balance is a reality in the special procedures. And you all also agreed that work needs to continue, especially to avoid regression. For us at GQUAL, a key aspect of making the gains in gender parity sustainable is to change the selection processes to ensure that they are more transparent, that they are more participatory, and that gender balance becomes a criteria in those selection appointments and decisions. So based on your experience with the selection process for mandate holders of the special procedures, perhaps if you can leave us with one main idea or next step or important opportunity that you see to make sure that these selection processes help us to sustain the gender balance that we have achieved at the special procedures. And we can follow the same order, so we can start with Ambassador Villegas.
Thank you, and I will leave with thank you for all very interesting and for the invitation. I will leave with one phrase, which is what Lisa said at the end on opening the door a little bit and then wide open. And I think that's the main goal that we should have now. And how to open fully the door, to build a narrative that is so obvious as it was for the prevention of torture. Because basically, I have to tell you, I have many friends like you from the human rights world, and I had at least 3 very high-level friends that wanted to put forward their application. And they didn't, because they said, no, for sure, this time it's for a woman. And so that narrative was so well done that even men that were qualified said, now is the time for women. So if we could build that narrative across the board for all the special procedures, plus the practicality of NGO informal consultation, with those 2 elements, the substance, the narrative, and the modalities of building and putting forward, I think we can really make a game changer. Because the half of humanity constituency is for every single special procedure, not only for prevention of torture. So thank you very much, and looking forward to working with you to build the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas, and we'll continue with Milena.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, gracias por todas las intervenciones que han sido realmente interesantes y me han hecho pensar mucho. Bueno, yo, basada en mi propia experiencia, creo que tenemos que trabajar mucho el empoderamiento, que se dice, ¿no?, de las mujeres, y realmente la confianza y la consciencia de que podemos presentarnos. Y lo digo por mi propia experiencia, porque yo realmente, a pesar de saber que podía, necesité una mujer que me dijera, ¿por qué no te presentas? Si tienes todas las capacidades, tienes la experiencia, conoces el funcionamiento del comité asesor, ¿por qué no te presentas? Y yo decía, ¿yo? Entonces, quiero decir, hay un elemento de, no sé si a veces es poca ambición o pensar que no podemos, que tenemos que trabajar. Y efectivamente, como habéis indicado, la sociedad civil detrás de animándonos y dando este mentorship, ¿no?, de las personas, creo que estáis desempeñando un papel excepcional, y por eso, bueno, pues también agradeceros, ¿no?, el trabajo que habéis hecho. Y última reflexión, a partir de ahí, es la importancia de esta interacción entre la sociedad civil y los órganos de protección de derechos humanos, porque este ejemplo de este informe, bueno, pues ha estado impulsado por la sociedad civil, ¿no? Entonces, realmente también dejar esta nota, ¿no?, a los que nos están escuchando, de que realmente también se puede, ¿no?, buscar un tema que es totalmente justo y legítimo y movilizar a los órganos que nos parecen tan lejanos para que haya un cambio en la cultura, en la propia cultura, ¿no?, y llegar a resultados, como estamos viendo al día de hoy, concretos y, bueno, pues muy prometedores. Tercera reflexión, seguimiento de nuestro informe. El seguimiento del informe del comité asesor. Como he mencionado, el comité es órgano subsidiario del Consejo y, por lo tanto, si quisiéramos hacer un seguimiento sobre la aplicación de estas recomendaciones, que sería muy útil, ya sea para destacar los éxitos o ya sea para ver qué otras ideas, qué otras recomendaciones se pueden desarrollar a partir de estas, bueno, pues necesitaríamos un mandato de los estados, ¿no? Y por lo tanto, bueno, pues también quería destacar ya, para finalizar, dar una nota también de confianza a los estados, ¿no?, porque precisamente en el informe se destacaba algunos estados, bueno, pues estaba México, estaba España, estaba Irlanda, que han introducido los objetivos de paridad dentro de su política exterior y que además definen como feminista en algunos casos, ¿no? Entonces ellos se han comprometido a presentar candidatas femeninas y a votar también candidatas femeninas, ¿no? Entonces, por lo tanto, creo que también esas pequeñas compromisos, ¿no?, que pueden parecer insignificantes, pues también pueden tener un efecto dominó muy importante. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias otra vez por la invitación.
Muchas gracias, Milena, por todas esas ideas. We'll continue then with Victor.
Si me permiten, yo voy a acompañar a Milena en el uso del español por un ratito, muy breve. Dos cosas. Yo creo que es importantísimo tomar de relevancia lo que el embajador Villegas, presidente del Consejo, mencionaba sobre la importancia de reconocer también nuestras responsabilidades individuales. Y eso tiene mucho que ver también con lo que quienes detentamos en este momento mandatos podemos hacer para promover una disciplina grupal que también asigne este valor. Cuando uno deja un mandato, deja siempre una carta para el comité consultivo en la cual uno plasma la percepción que uno tiene sobre cuáles son las calidades que podría requerirse en el proceso de selección. Y yo creo que valorar la diversidad y dentro de eso el principalísimo papel de la paridad de género es algo que tenemos que establecer una disciplina. Yo por lo menos estoy ya convencido, a 75% de mi mandato, estoy convencido de que el mensaje más importante que le puedo dejar a los estados es que quien detente este mandato no tiene que lucir como yo. Va a ser muy importante que haya también una escogencia deliberada en traer otras perspectivas y creo que esa disciplina es algo que es importante dentro de los mismos quienes detentamos mandatos. Y ahí la última palabra creo que también está para lo que creo que es una experiencia que está reflejada en este panel el día de hoy. Yo he disfrutado mucho la experiencia de obtener todo el flujo de circunstancias que han operado sistemáticamente desde mi punto de vista para que la situación sea lo que es desde el más alto nivel institucional, el presidente del Consejo de Derechos Humanos que demuestra una visión clara, una voluntad decidida para que esto sea parte de los criterios, las herramientas que brinda el comité asesor, la voz que representamos quienes nos beneficiamos de esa diversidad, de esa paridad dentro de quienes detentamos los mandatos y luego pasando por la visión sistemática que una campaña como GQUAL y la voz que presenta Lisa como una de las entidades de la sociedad civil. Yo creo que sobre eso hay que aprender. Este flujo que ustedes han armado para este panel el día de hoy representa de una manera muy clara para mí los diferentes elementos que hacen de esto una buena y posiblemente mejor práctica. Y bueno, entonces tal vez eso es lo que hay que encapsular un poquito y servírselo a otras entidades para ver si acaso avanzamos en este respecto. Yo les dejo, por supuesto, como siempre, mi admiración por este trabajo tan extraordinario que realizan y mi acompañamiento y mi apoyo decidido. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Vic. Seguimos entonces con Viviana.
Bueno, yo voy a seguir el ejemplo de mis queridos hispanohablantes para decir que creo que es importantísimo informar y debatir. Creo que eso sigue siendo clave para entender, para aprender, para evidenciar. Una de las lecciones de la campaña y una de las maneras en las que se crea la campaña es porque nosotros teníamos como una serie de percepciones, pero hasta que no miramos los datos, hasta que no los tiramos a los números y vimos esto históricamente, no teníamos la dimensión del problema, pero antes de la campaña había muchas otras personas que habían sistematizado parte de la información, ¿no? Había un paper que había escrito una internacionalista famosa hacía como 20 años, la profesora Chinking y otra colega nuestra, Nenke Grossman, que había escrito otro paper brillante, pero parte del cambio está no solo en tener la información, sino en organizarse para persuadir, para usar la información y tener los debates en los momentos en los que es oportuno tenerlos. Y creo que eso ha hecho una gran diferencia en todo el proceso de la campaña. y que ha sido muy importante tener una mirada muy abierta y una escucha activa de distintas personas, varones, mujeres, en distintos espacios de poder y no poder, para entender los obstáculos reales, las preocupaciones reales que cada uno y cada una tuvo en esos procesos y resolverlos. Y ahí se necesitó que haya persuasión, porque algunos de las inercias de la desigualdad son muy grandes. Y no se rompen solo con que haya algo escrito en un papelito, ¿no? Un compromiso en un documento, no. Se necesita a veces mucho coraje, mucha valentía, y algunas de estas decisiones tienen costos para todos, para los que se presentan, para los que no se presentan, para los que los eligen y los que no los eligen, para los que toman las decisiones desde distintos espacios. Entonces, creo que esa parte de informar para entender, informar para persuadir, utilizar la información en los momentos oportunos, pero también tener los debates necesarios para entender cómo tenemos que colaborar para seguir avanzando en este objetivo común es algo fundamental. Y en esto creo que en ese proceso entender que somos parte de una comunidad, que estamos preocupados por este tema, por el tema de la justicia internacional y los espacios de protección, porque eso nos hace también no una comunidad gigante en el mundo, sino una comunidad que es también una comunidad discreta de un grupo de personas, que seremos miles, pero no son todos los temas, es este tema en el que estamos tratando de encontrar una solución, una serie de soluciones prácticas que nos permitan avanzar en esto común, que esperemos que reverbere en otros temas importantísimos de estos sueños comunes de sociedades como más igualitarias, y que en el proceso de hacerlo, como nos interpelaba Víctor, entendamos también distintos aspectos interseccionales de la exclusión y de la discriminación. Y creo que acá hay como unos pendientes en los que la experiencia de los procedimientos especiales también nos muestran algunas de los claroscuros de lo que ocurre con los temas de justicia y de los tratados, porque ahí son los estados, son los gobiernos los que tienen un peso muy importante. Entonces, parte de cómo trasladar esta discusión que ha habido alrededor de procedimientos especiales a lo que tiene que ver con los estados y a lo que tiene que ver con las instituciones que regulan las maneras en las que se vota, va a requerir nuestro pensamiento común, nuestra investigación, nuestra capacidad de persuadir las instituciones internacionales, nuestras colegas y nuestros colegas a nivel nacional, de que hay cosas que hay que hacer un poquito distinto para alcanzar también esta meta de paridad. Entonces, nos van a seguir viendo. Y contamos con todas y con todos ustedes, y les agradecemos inmensamente todo lo que han hecho en este proceso realmente notable de cambio, que ha sido un gran aprendizaje para todos y todas nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Viviana. Last but not least, we'll finish with Lisa.
Vale, yo no puedo hablar español. English. I would like to thank you all. It's been a phenomenal journey, and I think words of closing from our side would be, this is a time where we can see what like-mindedness can really do. So if we're getting like-minded people around the table and really, working, I think Viviana has been talking about this quite a bit, collectively. I mean, this has to be, it's we together, right? And that's why our hashtag is We Can End Torture. It's always together, and it's doing things in a very, I think, agile way sometimes. You don't always have time for the big, plan of action, but you can move things quickly behind the scenes, moving on your intuition sometimes, your gut feeling that this is the right way to go. I understand, and of course we endorse the idea that there have to be, strategic decisions made on procedures that can be adjusted and changed. One that we would like to end with is saying, we fight for gender parity, but also geographical diversity. And I think it's really important. There were so many members from the Global South, strong female candidates who really were ready to take on this role and well equipped. We felt we had really worked hard coaching and cultivating, and hopefully, next time around, maybe that will be the new improved picture we might see. I think that would be a really fitting way for us to continue to evolve. But we're committed and we're here, and you now know that there's, in any event, a forest of young trees growing out there of really committed leaders who are, I think, incredibly encouraged, and hopefully will be even more so at the end of July 8th as we see this decision come into action. So thanks for inviting us. It was a pleasure to hear, as Victor said, the different roles. Each and every one of us play a different role, and they're all super important. We can't do it without each other. So thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Lisa, and many thanks to all. Thanks also for staying with us a couple of minutes longer. This has been a great event. We are grateful to all the panelists for joining us in the panel, in the discussion, but also in the work, in collaborating to make sure that gender parity becomes a reality in international justice. And also big thank you to everyone who has been following. We have recorded the event, so we'll make sure that it's also available for everyone who could not join us today. Thank you very much. And I think we can have a good evening.